This week is reInvent. I'm busy at the Sands. But I've had stickers made, and trust me, they are grand. Go to booth 307, they'll put some in your hand. Thank you to Chaos Search for helping build my brand. This week is indeed reInvent, and as such, last week, we saw the traditional dump of service launches that didn't make the keynote. But before we get into AWS problems, let's first discuss AWS solutions. That's right, this episode is sponsored in part by the AWS Solutions Group. AWS solutions are a variety of available for your use templates, CloudFormation templates, ways to download and effectively click button, receive happiness implementations that conform with best practices for a bunch of internal AWS services, but also third-party things that integrate well. Picture the serverless application repo, only a lot broader. To check it out, visit snark.cloud/AWS solutions. That's snark.cloud/AWS solutions. So what happened last week in AWS? Kind of a lot, but here are the highlights. 8K resolution encoding now available with AWS Elemental Media Convert. That's right, just when you thought that your 96-inch television wasn't large enough, they've got an answer for you. Amazon Comprehend launches real-time custom classification, so when it gets something wrong, it can immediately double down on that wrongness and continue to go further astray. Amazon EC2 T instances now support unlimited mode at AWS account level. What this means is that when a CPU credit allotment for a T2 or a T3 instance is exceeded, either performance can slam to a halt if unlimited mode is not enabled, or it can continue working just fine, but it costs you roughly 5 cents an hour per vCPU in most regions. Now, for T3s, they default to having it turned on. T2s default to off. You can now set an account-wide restriction that says, by default, does it wind up working at the unlimited mode enabled or not? I feel like this is a prerequisite for expanding free tier to T3s instead of the T2s that they're currently at, but we'll see. Amazon ECS service events now available as CloudWatch events. That's right. When something scales in, scales out, terminates, or falls on the floor, you can now catch that event and do something about it. Amazon Polly launches conversational speaking style voices. Unfortunately, condescending speaking style voices are still a feature release or two away, so Google's going to continue dominating that sector for the foreseeable future. Amazon Redshift introduces automatic table sort, an automated alternative to vacuum sort. They're very similar because they both suck. Amazon SES announces account-level suppression list. Rather than going list by list to tell various services not to email certain users, now you can set that account-wide. But in practice, almost nobody will because they want you to unsubscribe from each list individually. Aurora supports in-place conversion to global database. That's right, and multiple secondary regions. I think, but haven't bothered to check yet, that you can turn a multi-region global database back into a single-region database, but be sure you confirm that one before taking my word for it. After all, you already can't ever scale storage down, so their definition of elastic scaling storage just means it gets bigger forever and charges you accordingly. AWS Chatbot now supports running commands from Slack. It's a beta feature. That's right. AWS Chatbot now supports adding Slack and anyone with access to either your Slack workspace or Slack, the company's infrastructure, a path into running arbitrary commands within your AWS account. AWS Key Management Service supports asymmetric keys. That's right. Just in time for you to do the famous AWS dance at a wedding, the AWS asymmetric slide. AWS Lambda supports destinations for asynchronous invocations. Not that it will necessarily route those asynchronous invocations to where they want to go, but at least they finally have a destination in mind. AWS launches tag policies which is a legitimately awesome service release. I've been playing with it for a couple of days now and immediately went careening off into the trees by trying to use it wrongly, as is my traditional strategy. But you should check it out. Tag policies are a great governance tool. What's not so great is last week, Elastic expanded their search guard against a small company that was taking some search guard code and putting it other places. And now they've expanded it to other groups, including AWS and a few other folks. They've also not so directly threatened anyone using Amazon Elasticsearch, Open Distro for Elasticsearch, and a few others, and said they're not adding to the lawsuit now, but they should be aware they might be infringing in an open letter to the community, and closed with a sales pitch for their products. Because Elasticsearch, I'm just going to be blunt here, sucks as a company. It feels like they're the SCO of this decade. You know who doesn't suck? Chaos Search. Chaos Search has been a recurring sponsor of this podcast, and what makes them special is that they take your data, put it in S3, so it costs a pittance compared to anywhere else you could store it in the cloud, and then they provide an Elasticsearch-compatible API to it. Additionally, they're just good people who don't sue customers, threaten their customers with lawsuits, and basically make everyone regret doing business with them. You wouldn't think that would be a differentiator in the closing days of this decade, but here we are. Additionally, as mentioned in the obnoxious song at the beginning of this podcast, they are supporting my stickers at reInvent. Swing by booth 307 and grab yourself some. And while you're there, please talk smack about Elasticsearch on my behalf. Thank you again to Chaos Search for your generous sponsorship of my shenanigans, and I'm sure I will be telling you more about them in the coming weeks. AWS Secrets Manager makes it easier to rotate secrets through CloudFormation, including secrets for Redshift clusters and DocumentDB databases. I will say that I'm really starting to see Secrets Manager come into its own as the sort of service someone might use, rather than just, oh, it's another encrypted data store, only this one costs money. So, good work to that team. I'm cautiously optimistic about what's coming next. Amazon CloudFront announces 10 new edge locations, including its first edge location in Rome, Italy. That's right. CloudFront continues to expand globally, but now they have one just outside the walls of the Vatican. I'm assuming it's outside the walls of the Vatican. If it happens to be inside the secret archives, who's to say? I'm not one to judge. Please don't disappear me. Data Lifecycle Manager now supports time-based retention policies. What the hell was it using before? Generally, when I think about data lifecycle, I like to say things like, oh, after 365 days or 7 years, delete the data. Well, I suppose when they launched it, there was no data that old in the Data Lifecycle Manager, so they had time. Encrypt your Amazon DynamoDB data by using your own encryption keys. Do be aware that if you misconfigure this, say by doing it yourself or with a buggy SDK, this can kick your KMS bill into the stratosphere. Done correctly, it results in one KMS query every 5 minutes instead of many hundreds per second. Remember, you do pay per KMS request, so make sure that you're optimizing for this. Grafana Labs and AWS add optimizations and new features to Amazon CloudWatch data source. This is notable just because CloudWatch itself integrated changes from Grafana so it could interoperate better with a third-party offering. That's atypical and probably worth keeping our eye on. Interregion VPC peering now supports IPv6 traffic, so IPv6 is finally potentially something that doesn't die at the AWS network boundary as it's translated to IPv4. Introducing Amazon Workspace's streaming protocol in beta. It's a lot lighter weight protocol for the Workspaces client, which is awesome and fascinating, but it does fail to highlight anything resembling an encryption story, so ideally that gets fixed before it goes GA. Personally, I'm waiting until it expands beyond just supporting Windows Workspaces, but we'll see. Keep your eye on it. Introducing AWS cost categories. This is massive to my world as a cloud economist and almost irrelevant to most engineers, which is how you know it's good. This is a fantastic opportunity with a story that's being told incredibly poorly so far, which I may have to tackle after reInvent, but I already have a full dance card this week. Announcing AWS managed rules for AWS WAF, their web application firewall. This is awesome just because someone asked me how to sensibly manage WAF rules a couple of hours before this release came. So it turns out the correct answer for me was procrastinate a couple of hours and then give them a link to this release. Thanks, Amazon. You've got my back. There's an AWS Deep Racer update for those who don't recall. Deep Racer is a robot car for machine learning. Basically, it's a deep lens that can follow you into the bathroom. It has new features and new racing opportunities. And an upgraded sensor and LiDAR package. That's right, the robot car that's still backordered a year after it was announced now has an upgraded version that you also can't get. There was an absolutely massive AWS load balancer update with a whole bunch of new feature enhancements. My personal favorite of all of them was least outstanding requests, which, let's be honest, most of my AWS wishlist items have won that award for years now. I feel like I may have some competition, but my requests are still least outstanding. New for Amazon Aurora, you can use machine learning directly from your database. Sounds like something I made up, but it's not. There's a longstanding tenet in systems architecture that you separate your code from your data model. This release does the exact opposite of that, so have fun, full Stack Overflow developers. Safe deployment of application configuration settings with AWS App Config. You can predict a lot of what AWS is going to do next as far as releases go by looking at what companies in the technology space are widely beloved by the community, and then expect Amazon to do a ham-fisted attempt at replacing them. In this case, it's LaunchDarkly, who everyone loves, no one has a problem with, except apparently Amazon, who lies awake at night concerned that someone else might be making money somewhere. The next evolution in AWS single sign-on has a news blog, but I need a grown-up to weigh in on this for me. Why does every time I look at a single sign-on integration with AWS, it looks like my current choice of AWS Vault, an open source project that came out of 99 Designs, it makes that look like it is from 30 years in the future. It's awesome, and it's faster than any of these other solutions, and there's a lot less manual work involved. Is there something obvious that I'm missing? Please, write in. Let me know why I'm not seeing what I should be seeing. Welcome to AWS IoT Day. That's right. They announced 8 powerful features for IoT in a single day. If you're using IoT, take a look. If not, I'm not going to burden you with a massive listing of all 8, but 2 that I'm told are relevant are secure tunneling between IoT devices and message delivery via HTTP. You can look further into that if you dare/care, because I don't. And lastly, notifying third-party services of code build state changes. Historically, third parties were notified of code build state changes via Telegram or else AWS announcing a competing product to those third parties, but now there's a direct API-based notification from inside of code build to third-party integrated services. Awesome. And that is a summary, incomplete I know, of what happened last week in AWS. This week, as mentioned, is reInvent. I will be on the show floor and many other places, scurrying around from meeting to meeting for the next week. I'm here until Saturday, so if you're around and you see me, feel free to say hello, throw something at me, or just tell me you can't stand what I'm doing. On that note, if you hated this podcast, please leave it a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts, and if you liked it, do the same. Either way, while you're doing that, please leave a review that's humorous, because frankly, I need a laugh after this ridiculous week ends. Thanks, and I'll talk to you later this week.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.